Thank you everyone for joining the webinar today. I will turn it over to Karen.
Hi everyone. I see a lot of school counselors on the list, as well as some folks from our Delaware colleges and universities, as well as some others. So thank you so much for making the time to join today. I hope your families and you are doing well, and thanks for everything that you're doing to support our students right now during this really challenging time. Just a reminder, if you are school staff and you want hours for this, you have to register in PDMS so that I can award you hours. Actually, you'll be getting relicensure hours, 2 hours for this session. And I've sent out the course number, but it's 29090. I think you all probably know that by now. We are really lucky to have Kelly Sparks, Dr. Joyce Brown, and Amanda Mitchell on this call from the National Postsecondary Strategy Institute. We are partnering with them on our Delaware Student Success Collaborative, and they will tell you more about themselves, but they are working with many districts around the country, helping them with their post-secondary strategy, post-secondary plans to help ensure that all students have a plan when they leave high school. And using data to measure impact, which is the topic we're going to talk about today, is one of the most asked questions we get around the post-secondary advisement plans. How do you know that your activities and programs are having the intended impact? Sometimes you will learn that they are not, and then you can change course. The data allows you to see a story and enhance or change your plans as you go along. So there's no one right answer for everyone, but this session should give you some really good insights and strategies to putting your data to work, as the title says. So I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, I think, and we'll go from there. So thank you everyone again for joining.
So actually, this is Kelly. I'll take over. And thank you, Karen. So we are the National Postsecondary Strategy Institute, and along with me, our partners, Dr. Joyce Brown, who we will hear from shortly here on the webinar, and our third partner, Greg Nardiner, who is, I think, watching the webinar, but going to be silent for this one. And the three of us worked together in Chicago Public Schools back in the early 2000s, and at the central office at the district level. Building at the time, which was a brand new concept, to think beyond high school graduation into post-secondary success. And so over the years, as we kind of left the district and did our own work and kind of became more national, we came back together a couple of years ago to form National Postsecondary Strategy Institute with that same lens that we used in Chicago almost 20 years ago now, of really building the capacity at the district level to do the work with partners and external support, but really having the district own this work. I mean, what does that look like structurally and strategically at the district level? So that is the focus of our organization. And we are really excited to be engaged with the state of Delaware, with the Department of Education, and the Student Success Collaborative. We've gotten to know your state over the last 7 or 8 months. So today, for today's webinar, we're going to talk about really the theory, the thinking that goes behind establishing goals and setting intermediate measures to track your goals towards student post-secondary success. So just there is a way of thinking about how you set these measures. It's sometimes very daunting for folks. We just talked a little bit about the theory of like kind of the mindset you should have as you're going into there. Talk through some strategies of how you actually communicate data, so it's a friendly format for those who are using it. Whether you're on the production side or on the user side, it's helpful to just kind of hear the thinking of what that could look like, so you can communicate that within your district or within your school. And then Joyce will dive into more about what that looks like at a practitioner level. So as we think about setting goals, measuring our outcomes, checking if our work is actually having the impact we think it's having, what does that look like, and how do we move our work forward? And so actually I'm going to turn it over to Amanda, our operations manager, to talk through some housekeeping rules.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Kelly. So again, please do remember to mute your phones. We will have a Q&A section. We have a question section at the end where you'll be able to unmute your phone if you would like to. But if you have questions throughout the webinar, please do enter them in the chat box. Because we have a lot of people on the webinar, please refrain from sharing your video. And then the webinar will be recorded and posted to the Delaware Student Success Center website, which is on your screen, and I will also put in the chat box. And again, if you have not already done so, please do remember to put your name and district in the chat box. Thank you so much. Joyce, I will turn it over to you.
Thanks, Amanda, and hello, everyone. It is indeed my pleasure to engage with all of the people in Delaware that are on this call. I can tell you that the NIPSI team is very excited about working with you, so thanks for having us. The NIPSI is an organization that is dedicated to helping school districts organize and get practices and implementation strategies in place to help all students have a successful pathway. So our vision aligns totally with the Delaware Success Collaborative. On the screen, you see our NIPSI core building blocks. Our approach is really based upon a holistic model that integrates three critical components. We think districts should have a post-secondary advising framework and strategy, and you have that with the PSAP plan. You should have a data strategy, and third, an engagement of school counselors. By profession, I am a school counselor, and I often say I'm a shameless school counselor advocate. So later in the presentation, I will be sharing some ground level practitioner strategies that school counselors and their collaborative partners can engage in. We want you to know that we have done this work around the third largest district in the United States, Chicago Public Schools, where Greg, Kelly, and I all worked together and formed the very first post-secondary advising department across this large urban district. So we want you to know that we have firsthand experience. So the coaching and the suggestions that we make are not anything that we've learned, but we've all worked at the district level. At our core belief is that all students should have equity and they should have equitable outcomes. And so our core principles are focused on equitable results. All students should be prepared for post-secondary success at the end of high school. They should be empowered and have a solid, concrete plan as to what their next steps are going to be so that they can choose their path. And that districts should be organized well, because if you're going to make change happen, and districts are at the core of this change, you have to be organized. So building the internal capacity necessary to get to this change is what we are all about. On the next slide, you will see that we are really doing this work across the nation. To date, we have worked with over 150 school districts. We like to say that they have been NIPSIfied. So we are very happy to include Delaware as part of this work. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Kelly.
Thanks, Joyce. So the first section we want to talk about is really just how you think about developing your goals and your intermediate measures. So if you want to go to the next slide, Amanda, it really starts with your theory of action. And theory of action is, a kind of a just speak, policy wonk, evaluator type word. But it really is the best language to use here, because it is your, in order to create good performance measures or outcome measures, whatever you want to call them, you do need to have some theory of what you want to do, some guess about what you want to do and how that's going to unfold. And that is the basis for every measure you are going to develop. So do our district level folks, do our school level folks usually go around talking about what is my theory of action? No, not typically. I do, because I'm an evaluator by trade. But what it is it's really your district mission. It's whatever strategic priorities that you have, the beliefs that you have in your district, in your school, in your daily work. Or maybe it's things that you've identified, maybe it's gaps that you've already identified. But these are the things that you know, that you believe in, that you want to achieve, is your theory of action. So as a starting point, before you sit down to try to create X% of kids are going to have this GPA, or X% of kids, increased number of kids are going to graduate, increase the number of kids who are going to have gainful employment. Before you do those measures, you first need to sit down and reflect on what is it that we're trying to achieve? What is our theory of action? So I have a quick polling question for you that I'll turn over to Amanda.
Wonderful. So the polling question is, do you know your district's mission? So you will see a poll up on your screen. Go ahead and click either yes or no. I'll give everyone about 30 seconds, and then I will share the results. Okay, I'll give everyone about 10 more seconds. Okay, wonderful. So you should be seeing on your screen, 77% of the participants who answered the question said yes, they do know their district's mission.
Okay, great. So that is that, if you're in that they're in that quarter of the participants who said you don't know your district mission, or it might be your school mission, that is the place to start. So again, if you want to create performance measures and be able to track your work, you need to have a North Star that you're working towards, and you need to know what that North Star is. Otherwise, you're going to be tracking a bunch of random stuff that at the end you don't know if it's really attached to what what you want to achieve or not. So I want to give you a very quick example theory of action. So I'm going to keep using this term theory of action throughout the presentation. Know again that means it's like your vision, your beliefs, your strategic priorities, all of what everybody calls them different things. So I'm going to stick with theory of action and try to keep that as our common language for this presentation. So I'm just giving a quick example here. Like, let's say the district goal is students are enrolled in college. Now, typically districts will have numerous goals. So it doesn't have to be just one that you're picking, but for simplicity, I'm going to pick one that's fairly straightforward. So let's say our goal as a district is that students enroll in college. So from there, our theory needs to be, well, what next? If we want kids to enroll in college, what do we need to do to make sure they get there? So we know from research, numerous studies now at this point, that students who complete their FAFSA before enrolling in college are much more likely to actually enroll. So that would be an intermediate measure. And we know if we want our kids to complete the FAFSA by the end of high school, that we need to start working with them early. And so that's our theory. In order for kids to enroll in college, we want to work with them to make sure they complete their FAFSA before they graduate. And that means we need to start working with them early in the school year. So sometimes your theory of action, if possible, your theory of action should be based on what research is telling you. If there isn't research in the field, like at NPSI, we like to innovate, we like to build, we like to create. Sometimes what you're doing doesn't have the research basis, but it should have a logical flow from A to B to C. All right, next slide. So there are a lot of places where you can be setting these goals. So you'll see this is a lot of information on one slide, and often I think where people get lost. So there is so much to choose, right? We can start with surveys, like a senior survey, a freshman survey. We can start with our transcript data, like what are the grades, attendance, behavior. We can look at 8th and 9th transition. There are a ton of good resources out there now, like Naviance, or the planner tools, where you can actually get input on what on college and career planning and exploration. And then there's a number of ways you can be breaking this down by your district. If you're a large district, you might have sub-networks within there, looking at it by school, within a school, looking at it by grade. There's always the demographics, your GPA and ACT scores, what programs are people participating in, and so forth. So the question we always get when we lay this out, because I think it is helpful to map out all of the things that you could do. The question that people often have is like, well, where do we start? What do we do? There's so much we could be doing. So it comes back to, you take that map of all of the stuff that's going to completely overwhelm you and say, well, it really depends on your theory of action. What is it that we are trying to achieve? You need to be able to answer that question first. And if you don't know the answer to that question, then you need to get your leadership team in a room and have that conversation, because that is going to build, be the successful, sustaining foundation for all of your measurement and your evaluation going forward. So again, it has to be tied to a framework of whether it's your vision, your beliefs, your strategic priorities, whether it was a strong analysis you did on where are the gaps, what student groups are struggling, but it has to be something you believe in and something that you believe you can change, because you have to be doing those stair steps, that logical flow. If we want to get kids to graduate, we need them to complete the FAFSA. If we need them to complete the FAFSA, we need to work with them early in senior year. If we want to work with them early in senior year, we need to have workshops. You need to be able to create those steps. If you pick something that you don't know how to change, you won't have those steps to measure. Doesn't mean it's not important. It doesn't mean you're not going to tackle it at some point, but you need to be able to start with one or two things that clearly align to your theory of action and where you have a guess of how you're going to get there. And then the other thing you need to really keep in the back of your mind is that, and I like the way Karen said this as she kicked off the webinar, is that you do really need to be prepared to embrace the data. Data is just what it is, right? It tells a story, just like Karen said. I love how she said it tells a story. That story doesn't have to be good or bad. It's just the story. It's where we are. So it's going to give us the information of where we are and what steps we need to take without any judgment of good or bad. It's just our starting point, and then our reflection point of, did what we do show the effect we thought it was going to or not? So you need to really embrace data in that way, almost as a agnostic piece. It could be lots of feelings, lots of different ways, but it is what it is, and it's going to help us make our next step. All right, so one more another polling question for you.
Okay, so how many stated goals does your district have? So 8 or more, 5 to 7, 1 to 4, or none. So I will give everyone about 30 seconds to answer. Give everyone about 10 more seconds. Okay, it looks like around 50% say 5 to 7 and 38% say 1 to 4. And we only have a few people that have 8 or more.
That's great. Thank you. I have to say I'm pleased to see that no one has none. I'd say like the only wrong answer here would be none. You should have something that you're working on and that you're measuring for your district. But otherwise, you know, the number, because again, I always tell people to start with with 2 to 3, get really good in those areas of, you know, get as far as building your strategies, know what you're doing, looking at the data, and then build on top of that. But how kind of advanced, how sophisticated you are, how advanced you are in the implementation of a program will impact how many you can do, and how large your district or your school is will impact how many you do. So with You know, last year I worked with Chicago Public Schools on their 5-year vision, and they had probably almost 20 goals for the district. But they're a large district with a lot of people as under office who can subdivide it. So early childhood had 3, elementary schools had 6, high schools had another 6 or 7. But they have, that means within that group, and as they subdivide it, no individual department had more than 2 to 3. So if you're a small district, or if you're one school, you might pick 2 or 3, you might pick 1, honestly, depending on where you are in your work, because that's where everyone needs to focus. So just for just to share what we did back in the early 2000s when I was in Chicago, I'll go back to this data slide that has all of the possibilities of what you can do, and just share that we, over a course of 10 years, did complete everything on this page, but we didn't do it all at once. So we started with what we knew. So we did a senior survey, and really started to understand what seniors were doing, what their post-secondary plans were. Then we moved on to college enrollment. At that time, National Student Clearinghouse was just coming out, so we were able to learn there. Once we really understood what was going on with college enrollment and set a goal there, we moved on to employment. We did that because that was the data that was available for us to make the next step. From employment, we went into starting to add in all of the student transcript data, looking at students' GPAs, looking at their course taking patterns and so forth. Then we moved into FAFSA. And again, the reason of our progression, it's not necessarily the progression any district will take. This is what made sense for us back in 2003 through 2013 as we grew. But then, so then after FAFSA, we went to 8th to 9th transition. And then shortly before I left the district, we started to dive into that college and career exploration piece, which the district still is trying to kind of figure out at this point in time. But there's no right answer. But as you can see, you can kind of start in one place, whichever place you pick that aligns with your vision, aligns with what you want to achieve, and slowly build. The other key point is that it takes time to get there, right? You're not going to start with everything, and you shouldn't, because if you start day one with 30 metrics, you're going to get lost. You're going to get lost in the sea of data. So you really have to hold yourself accountable to keeping just a few. So I do see that there was a question about the theory of action, and would you, like, do you have, is it one theory of action or multiple? It is multiple theories of action. For every goal you set, you will have a theory of action. So like looking at this page, like I gave the example of college enrollment, and you'll have like multiple strands too. I was trying to keep it simplistic for this version, or for this presentation. But if we were in a room with a whiteboard, I would kind of draw some more messy things for you. So your college, if you want to increase college enrollment, one step is working on the FAFSA. You'll have another kind of like a vertical strand that would be around probably college applications, and you would have another vertical strand that would be around academics and being ready so you don't have to enter remedial courses and so forth. But then if your goal is also around, let's say, 8th to 9th transition, you'll have a whole separate theory of action related to that. So again, I wouldn't recommend that everybody go out and figure out 17 different theories of action related to everything on this page. Start with your primary goal. What is your vision? What are your strategic priorities? And over time, over 5 to 10 years, you will probably have 30 to 40 different theories of action. It won't seem like that much because you're taking them one at a time. So let's move into kind of away from the theory a little bit into what does it actually look like to communicate your data. So everybody has data of some sort. Some are more sophisticated than others. Whether it is qualitative data, whether it's information or of any sort, whether it's Google spreadsheets or a very expensive dashboard that you've paid somebody to produce. Everybody has data. Generally, people are overwhelmed with the data and don't know how to engage with it. So typically what we see happen in districts, and this will probably make sense to some of you because you're probably experiencing it right now, there's data. There's always data of some sort, whatever it looks like. And the people who have access to that data, whether it's the IT staff or you have a research and evaluation staff, whether it's your computer science or your history teacher at your school, whoever has access to that, like, we have data, let's push it out. Like, we're just gonna make it out, we're gonna make it available, and people will do something with it. The problem is, which I'm guessing many of you can relate, is just because data is out there doesn't mean we know what to do with it. First of all, we might not know how to get you there, but even if we can get to it, it's not one of those, if you build it, they will come situation. It's not, I can't just, nobody in the world can just like look at data and sift through like, what is this supposed to be? What do I do with it? So you have data out there, but it's not really clear, there's not clear actions tied to it. So in order to get there, you have to do, really embrace what we call engaged data delivery. So the difference here is that it starts with the folks who know how to track the data, who are collecting it or analyzing it, being fully connected, a symbiotic relationship with those folks who are doing the program design and implementation, who are working in the schools, who are working with the students to know what is needed and in what format. So there has to be a constant circle of planning and communication. They can't happen in silos. You can't have folks who have access to the data saying, here's how it should look. And you shouldn't have people just coming up with strategies to implement without saying, what is the data saying? And this is what I need. When you have this nice partnership between data and program design or strategy implementation, whatever you want to call it, then you can very clearly tie the data to actions and see the impact. So now we know, I get this report, it tells me here are my gaps. I'm going to implement my theory of action to say, step 1, step 2, step 3, we're going to look at FAFSA, we're going to track how many workshops we're doing, and then in another month, we'll see if FAFSA went up or down, and we'll know if our actions actually impacted the outcomes of the data. All right, so I'm pausing for another polling question here.
Perfect. So the next polling question is going to be, who is the primary user of your district data report? Is it the superintendent, the principals, the counselors, the teachers, or other district staff? So I'll give everyone about 30 seconds to answer, and then I will go ahead and share the results. Okay, wonderful. It looks like 43% say principal, other district staff, and then about 13% say counselors and superintendent.
Great. All right. So as we think about this idea that we are producing the reports for whoever our primary audience is in silos, you do really need to think about when a new data point becomes available, who do you share it, who is it shared with? And even if your primary audience is your superintendent or your principal or the counselors in the school buildings, everybody needs to know that information in some fashion. So you're at the school level, principals and teachers and counselors, other school support staff, everybody needs that information. Maybe not in the same way, which we'll get to that in a second. But you really need to think about a data communication strategy to make sure everybody is hearing it. If it is truly your theory of action and it's our North Star and we're all working towards it, then I think then clearly everybody needs to know how they contribute, and then can see the progress towards that from their lens. At the district level, certainly it's going to be the superintendent, any other district level leaders, but then you also need to think about our primary audience in education, right? The students. What do students need to know? What do families and external partners need to know to help support both either the students or the schools, whoever their partnership is. So the key to figuring out what does everybody need to know and when, it is all around those communication strategies. It's having the right people in the conversation. So if you don't know what you should be sharing with students, you get a room of students together and ask them, right? I will tell you, I've been in many conversations. Even when I worked at the district, we would have student voice committees come in and ask us questions about dropout rates and what that means, and some pretty sophisticated questions. Like, they are ready to engage, and they will shape the way you think about what you measure and how you share it externally. So going back to our example, first I want to talk a little bit about how do you report the data. So if you think about it, if we have 6 or 7 or 8 different audiences, they're not all going to look at the same report and get the same stuff out of it. So they all are going to have, again, you need to figure out through conversations with the different stakeholder groups what they need to hear and when. So it could be a real-time web-based reporting tool. You might have people who are looking at this data every day and need to log in and see where they are. You might need something that's more action-oriented, where it is very clear if you've seen this movement. These are things like warning lists, right, where not only does it give you some new update, but it flags what students need to have some extra support in reading or in attendance or behavior. It might be a weekly report for like, you know, at the principal level. Maybe it's something more where you need to see an update every week. At the superintendent level, it might be something where you see it monthly. It might just be a year-end report. Thinking about like the mayor or the governor's office, it might be something that they look at annually and over time. But the key is to think about who it is you're sharing it with and what do they need. So we're going to go through some quick examples, going back to this theory of action that I shared at the beginning. Oh yeah, but I do want to be clear that when we talk about a data strategy, it is not, it is all this theory and this communication and building the ideas together. It is not this magical data system that you can see. So there are tons of tools. I get that question a lot, like what student information system would you recommend? What, like, do you recommend Naviance? Is there something better? Like, I will tell you, there is no magical tool solution that will give you all of your data in these pretty fantastic reports. They all have pluses, they all have drawbacks. You have to find what works for you. I will say they will all equally work depending on whatever your needs are. So there is no like, just go buy X and it'll work. They're all dependent on you knowing what it is you want to achieve and what you want to measure, and then you build that into your data system. Okay, so quickly going back to our theory of action that we used as an example. So how do we take that theory of action and actually put some metrics to it? So we said students should enroll, we want students to enroll in college. That means we need to have a measure, or we're monitoring college enrollment. X% of kids will go to college enrollment, increase college enrollment by 10%. You might pick a specific subgroup, so your goal might be increase college enrollment rates for African American males. But there's going to be a metric about monitoring college enrollment. Seniors completing the FAFSA before enrolling in college. Now we need to have a metric around FAFSA completion. So every step in your theory of action needs to have some metrics tied to it. Seniors completing FAFSA early in the calendar year means that we need the ability for the folks who are actually working with the students to track that data regularly. So in some places actually have this down to a daily feed from their state. You know, in Delaware, I think you guys get weekly updates. So whatever it is, there's that more frequent interaction of who completed the FAFSA. So what this looks like in practice is our different reporting systems. So when we think about needing to know who completed the FAFSA, these are really old and dated. I pulled them from when I worked in Chicago Public Schools. But you need a reporting system where somebody at the school level can actually log in and see the list of students, which is blacked out here or grayed out here, and did they complete it, yes or no. So if we look at the next example, this is a summary report. So this was done at the end of the year. This is what senior leadership, this is what actually a school principal wanted to see at the end of the year, like where did we land and what students did we, what students were completing it at rates higher than others so we can plan for the next year. This wouldn't be helpful to the counselors doing their day-to-day work, but this report was really helpful for school leadership at the end of the FAFSA completion season when they were making plans for the next year. And then the next example is how we would show data to like superintendent senior leadership, right? They don't want a lengthy report with 30 different metrics broken down in it. They want like the upshot. So then we would do a presentation deck to say, here are the key things we want to see. They wanted to see that line going up on the explanation for why. So really, you do have to have those conversations to figure out what folks need to know and how they respond best in the presentation. All right, next polling question.
Okay, does your district have a calendar of when reports are available? Yes or no? So I'll give everyone about 30 seconds to answer. Okay, so it looks like 77% say no, your district does not have a calendar of when data reports are available.
So that is the probably one of the kind of first really easy lifts that you can do, one of the really easy actions that you can do to build this communication structure between the folks who have access to the data and the folks who need the data. If we're expecting there to be kind of a symbiotic relationship and for folks to actually look at the data and plan and use it, which is what you need to actually look, shape your performance measures, they need to know when that data is coming out. So simply putting down, even if it's a month, right? So maybe you don't know when you're going to have your state test scores released, but we generally know it's in August. And just having a calendar, that they can expect. Test scores over the summer, FAFSA data starts in mid-October. That sort of thing is really helpful to building that communication and that transparency around data and its availability. Okay, so I want to make a couple points before we move into the kind of how this all relates to what you're doing now. Is just again thinking about this communication strategy. So we want to achieve this fancy, theory on the left of data and program design working together and this magical circle of planning and communication. How do you get there? So three points that you can really think about how to implement now is just that you start putting together some monthly meetings to review data. Whatever data you have. It doesn't have to be fancy. It doesn't have to be pretty. So the examples I gave were not pretty whatsoever. But start the commitment to meet monthly to review your data. You should have both representatives of the folks who are running the data, whoever that is, and the folks who are going to be using it in the same conversation. That monthly meeting should be the people who are kind of taking action on that data, day to day, week to week, month to month, with the folks who can run the reports. Because in that conversation, you are going to have questions of, could we see the data looking like this? And you need to have somebody who says, yes, we could do that, or no, we can't because of whatever reason. But without that communication, you're not going to get to the user-friendly reports you need to have. And you really need to make sure that whoever's providing that data if it's a larger district and you have a district data team, or data person, whatever, they really need the opportunity to be at the schools, talking to the folks who are using that at the schools. So again, I worked for Chicago Public Schools, a large district, so I had 6 people on my team at the district who were just sitting in the district office running data. I know that's not typical, but we were there. It was really important for us not to stay sitting in our offices at the central office. We went out. Everybody on my team was required to go out at least once a month to meet with school counselors and to meet with principals to understand what it was they needed. And then just a quick summary on the next slide around the data team. It could be a data person. It could be 3 people who it's a quarter of their job to think about data. But just some things to think about. That you really need to push yourself to think outside of the box. Like I said, there's a lot of data that we're using all the time. It may not be neatly tied into a data set you can grab, but you need to think about what is available. Really focus on accuracy and clarity. A lot of times you don't have perfect data. All you have to do is define what you have. So maybe you only have data for the students who completed a survey, and maybe that's only 30% of your students. You can still report the data, you can still use that data. You just have to be clear to folks what it is you're reporting, so everyone understands the starting point that you have. Again, you have to communicate with the data users regularly. Try starting those monthly meetings, and incorporate some data training so everybody's comfortable looking at numbers, that everybody's comfortable putting together a theory of action. So think about how you can get, it doesn't have to be a formal training where everyone signs up, but think about how you can integrate some of those conversations between your kind of data evaluation minded folks and those who are taking action with it. And then always be on call from the data standpoint. The people who are creating those reports, generating those numbers, pushing them out, really need to have a customer service focus to make this a engaged process. And it is the leadership's job to protect that data team's time. All right, so I just want to make a quick, I'm going to go through this really quickly because I want to hand it over to Joyce. So what does this all mean for you now as you're sitting in your homes, but in Delaware, and thinking about your planning? So you guys have your post-secondary advisory plan for which you have to do performance measures. So I want to quickly go through and just attach like some of the language I've used to the structure that you're thinking through for your PSAP. So you start with every student, college and career ready, where you are asked to outline your vision and what are the steps you're thinking of getting there. So that is exactly the theory of action that I'm talking about. So if you go back and you look at that section of your PSAP and it's not kind of a logical flow of here's where we're going and here's how we're getting there, revise that with some of the thinking that we have here on the theory of action. But that part of your PSAP is your theory of action, your vision and the steps to get there. So the section where you're asked to report your overall progress. I hear a lot of districts now across the country call this progress monitoring, so that might kind of resonate with you. But this is based on those goals you outlined for your vision, for your theory of action. What do you need to know along the way to make sure you're on track? So this is where you could integrate some of that subgroup analysis around demographics or different schools and so forth. All right, on the next slide, we'll look at the next slide is something you can actually come back and look at later after we send out the PowerPoint, are just ideas of post-secondary metrics that we look at from NPSI. If you're thinking about like what are our goals or what are some of those measures on the way, this is kind of like a good set of 20 that we see districts across the country working on. And so now on the next slide, we'll go through the next 4 sections. So the section on the PSAP about targeted student supports. This is, what are you doing to contribute to your goals? This is where you should be documenting and counting. So while an outcome measure isn't the number of workshops you've had, you do have to do that at some point. You do actually have to count and document what you're doing, because you're going to match that up to see if it's working. And so vertical alignment, are you actually covering from 8th grade to post-secondary education and career? Under strengthening supports, this is where we're matching everything up now. So is what we're doing effective? Is your theory of action right? It is a theory. Doesn't mean it's right? It's your best guess, and maybe it's based on research if it exists. It doesn't mean that we got it right. So if the data story is telling us the steps we're taking aren't quite lining up and showing us the impact, then we revise. That is what it is for. That is what data is for, to help us revise. And then under continuous improvement, the question is really, is what you're doing for your professional development aligned to your vision? Are you doing things that are actually going to help support those action steps you identified? Or is it just kind of like a bunch of random things you selected? And it should be the first. So I'm actually gonna turn this over to Joyce to talk through this more on more of a practitioner level.
Thanks so much, Kelly. Well, you've heard a lot of data talk from Kelly. So at this time, what I want to do is bring it down to the practitioner level. And if I could just tell you a few takeaways that I want you to take from this discussion that Kelly and I are having with you, it would be these things. So you can get out your pens and write this down. Number one, data is a good 4-letter word. If you all were on unmute, I would have you say that out loud. I know you know a lot of 4-letter words, and we want data to be one that you use every single day. Data is so important because it will help you set goals. And as Kelly said, it's going to help inform your theory of action planning. You cannot make a plan unless you're looking at some hard numbers, because otherwise you do what we call in the counseling world, random acts of planning. We don't want you to do that. So you're going to use data, get it from wherever you can, and make your action plan. So that's point one. Data is a good 4-letter word. The other point is that goals must be based on data. You have to use data to set your goals. When you set your goals, the goals have to be very specific, and they also have to be measurable. So you look at the data, you figure out the target that you want to address from the data. You say, do I want to increase what's happening, what I'm seeing, or do I want to decrease it? Do I want to increase FAFSA completions? And do I want to decrease course failure? So you decide, what is the goal? What are you going to do with the goal? You're going to increase it or decrease it? Who do you want to do it with? So you have to set specific targets for your data. What subgroup needs to be helped? Is it the males? Is it the females? Is it the homeless kids? Who are the target groups? And then you have to set an accountability goal. I'm going to do this work within this time frame. I'm going to look at my results, and I expect to get results at the end of the year, at mid-semester, next month, next week, whatever. And then most importantly, everyone must use data to inform their practice. So this is the practitioner perspective, specifically targeting school counselors who, as we know, are emerging as post-secondary leaders across the United States. Now, over the years, we've had many roles and responsibilities, and the new emerging role is how can school counselors support student achievement? So we want to make sure that school counselors are engaged in this work. In fact, we have a model, the American School Counseling Association model, that says we should use data in our practice. So I'm very excited about the PSAP plan because it puts our work solidly into a planning process where we can use data. On the next slide, you will see that in order to use data, we need to have some action steps that schools and the district can take to support that. If you're like most school counselors and other practitioners coming into this space of using data to drive change and make plans, there's not a lot of training around that. And so it is very important that we see and take measurable steps to get professional development for the ground level practitioners so that they understand what to do to develop a good, solid PSAP plan. That's why we're excited to talk to you today. This is one of the first steps, professional development. The second thing is you need to understand tracking post-secondary indicators. As Kelly said, identify those theory of action goals that you want to work on. So that is a second strategy that you should take on. And then make sure you use the data to guide your post-secondary advising progress. Data is everywhere. It has to be like the air you breathe in your daily work. And then school counselors then must use what they know to work interactively and collaboratively with all stakeholders and take on a lead role in this. I saw on the survey that only 13% were really engaged in looking at data alongside of all stakeholders. So we want that to change as a result of this training session. On the next slide, you will see that there are common data elements, and we want to make sure these common accountability measures that are listed in the PSAP plans are all aligned. So the practitioners, the school counselors, along with advisors, external partners, you all should be looking at the same data once you decide what your theory of action is, what goals you're going to set. You have to align your work so that everybody is working together on these same goals. What we see so much of the time is that school counselors are working on a lot of social and emotional issues, and they're at the periphery of the student achievement work. But the PSAP plan puts you solidly in it, and you should be on the developing teams and the planning team because school counselors have assigned caseloads, and they have a model that's saying use data to advance student achievement. On the next side, you will see a polling question. So when you think about which stakeholder group do school counselors regularly discuss data? Amanda, will you take that?
Yep, perfect. So I just launched the poll. I'll give you guys about 30 to 45 seconds to answer.
Where do you regularly discuss? Who do you regularly discuss data with? And if you're not a school counselor, who do you think school counselors are discussing data with?
Okay, looks like 77% say principals, and then we're split at 10 and 13% between superintendents and central office leadership and teachers.
That's terrific. I am so glad that the practitioners are engaging with their principals. That forms the core of the leadership team. And they also should extend out to the teachers, because we cannot do this work in silos. So everybody in the school building should know the same data and what the results are. One strategy is to put up data walls. Once you decide on your theory of action, actually put up what the completion rates are. Let's take FAFSA, for example, because I know that you all are tracking that. We put the FAFSA tracking results up every single week. And so we created like a friendly competition to see who got most of the FAFSAs done. We had an advisory model. And so the advisories had a little friendly competition, but you could do that with males and females. We use English teachers a lot to help us do the FAFSA completion, so we can track by English class. So it should be very transparent. We let students know what the completion rates are. When the senior class hit a certain target, there was a reward for all seniors. We let parents know how many completions we were done. So once you get a data point that you're working your theory of action around, make sure that you communicate it out and that it's very visible and you're monitoring it in a very transparent way. So thank you. On the next slide, we have the crux of the collaborative action planning. I see this as a key strategy for school counselors and other practitioners. This is the new work plan, and it encompasses 6 areas that Kelly already reviewed. But let's just take a quick peek, because I'm going to press the practitioners to make work plans for each of these areas that will inform the PSAP. So every student, college and career ready, overall progress, targeted student supports, vertical alignment, strengthening supports, and continuous improvement. These are the areas. So let's start with the first one. On the next slide, every student, college and career ready. At the crux of this will be using data, and you're going to make a work plan that identifies what are the 9th grade milestones. What are the things that you're going to make sure every 9th grade student knows as a result of you looking at the data? How you're going to track and monitor it? What activities are you going to plan around it? So to contribute to the PSAP, to make sure every student is college and career ready, we're going to begin with the end in mind at the 9th grade, and even push it back down into the middle grades. We say going to college really begins in kindergarten, and we know many well-resourced students, their parents tell them at birth that college or some post-secondary career is an opportunity and an option that they should be working toward. So we want to start at the very least at the 9th grade. Identify your 12th grade milestones. What will all seniors have to do to make sure they have a solid plan at the end of high school? And then after graduation, what are the milestones that they have to do? Do they have to be entering a 2-year apprenticeship program, military, or a 4-year institution, or some training program, or will they put their CTE certifications into an employment opportunity? So you should identify the milestones at each grade level, 9, 12, and graduation milestones. The next area, tracking overall progress. I love to do progress monitoring. This is a way of letting students know, every single student, are they on track or off track? And when I work with school counselors in the district, I often ask, how many of your students have failed classes? What's the highest class failed? How many students are not coming to school on your caseload? And they should have that information at the fingertip if they're really monitoring progress. We suggest doing what we call bag reports, monitoring behavior, attendance, and grades for each and every student. And that could be done simply with an Excel spreadsheet and using mail merge letters to inform. So those are the strategies you should be putting on your work plan. How are you tracking and monitoring 9th graders, 10th, 11th, and 12th graders? And how are you tracking and monitoring every single student from high school to their post-secondary pathway? This is a new area of work for school counselors and their collaborative partners. It is a heavy lift, but this is a living example about how you engage and use data from a practitioner's level. And the next slide is about targeting student supports. This is another work area for you. So you're going to make a plan, and you're going to have targeted groups that you're using, that you are specifically going to identify where you want to use your strategies. I said at the beginning that the data will tell you who you need to work with. This work is about equitable outcomes for all students. So who needs a little bit more? Who is getting it? So the data will tell you where to target your subgroups so that you can make specific supports for them. I'll give you an example. We were targeting attendance, and that's really a heavy lift for a lot of people. You know, most kids are tardy to school, and the tardies were first period. So we did focus groups of students to say, what would make you come to school? They would tell us crazy stuff like, can you have pancakes for us every day? We would laugh and say, okay, if that's gonna make you come. But one young man said, you know, if we had a room to play video games before we started class, we would get here. I said, that's a brilliant idea. And so you're making targeted supports, targeted strategies to make sure the data changes. You're going to disaggregate the data. That means you aren't looking at it at one whole cloth piece. You're going to disaggregate it to say, Where is the attendance need? Is it ninth graders who have the lowest attendance rates? Is it the sophomores, juniors, or seniors? Who's not coming to school? Is it the males or the females? Is it the homeless students, the foster care students, the students who live in a certain zip code? So that finite tracking will be amazing to find out how effective you are. I know sometimes it feels like we're on a treadmill doing a lot of things, but when we target the subgroups and provide interventions, then we can create these, what we call closing the gap action plans, to specifically say what it is you're doing. And then we're also looking at this aggregating all of the performance metrics that are in the post-secondary advising plan. Now, looking at and tracking and monitoring your strategies is what we want to capture. You all are part of the Delaware Success Collaborative, and by working with you and working with each other, we're going to document a lot of best practices to share with other districts throughout Delaware, and that's very exciting work. So the next level of the work plan is vertical alignment. In this section, you will work on planning transition strategies and processes, especially between grades 8 and 9, grades 9 to 12, graduation into post-secondary. What kind of interventions will you make up? Most important is grade 8 to 9, because it's so critically important to get the students off to a good start. Our vision in Chicago was to make sure all of the ninth graders, and at that time, there were 30,000 of them. What would it take to make sure every single ninth grade student entered high school and did not have any failure? So as you develop your work plan, you need to develop strategies. Maybe it's an extended orientation program. Maybe it's developing a peer mentoring program. Maybe it's multiple parent meetings. So whatever feels right for you and your school and your district, you need to put together a transition plan that supports students as they move from grade 8 to 9, move into grades 9, 10, 11, and 12. You know, people get senioritis, and so that transition from high school to post-secondary is very important as well. On the next slide, we will just review some strategies around making a work plan on student supports. And at the crust of all of this is using data. That's why we have it up there above the work plan. We have to use data and design activities. So in terms of strengthening student supports, you need to say what group needs to be supported, what are you doing, how are you communicating, and what is your follow-up. So on the counselor work plan, I'm suggesting that you calendar the student support activities. You should have a student support calendar developed, so whoever is asking, what are you doing to help develop out this post-secondary advising plan, it is at the ready. It could be color-coded by grade level, by gender, and alongside of that, you have to always have parent activities as well. That's a big piece. I advise counselors and other collaborative partners to do whatever you do for kids, you also have to do for parents. And you would be amazed at how much they wanted to learn as well. When I talk about post-secondary opportunities, I always tell parents, and you can go as well. It's like an Oprah moment. Like, I'm telling all your kids how to apply, but I'm gonna teach you how to apply as well. And so the last area, continuous improvement, Kelly touched on this because you have to be supported to learn and strengthen the areas that you need development in. And I am just so thrilled about all the supports that the Delaware Department of Education has provided for you. And I don't know if you've taken advantage of any of these, but I would certainly want to point them out to you to know that they are available and ready for your use, because it's going to strengthen your practice. So the National College Access Network, they have wonderful post-secondary advising modules, and you can access those. Sally Mae has modules. Texas OnCourse, those are post-secondary advising modules that are out of the state of Texas. They're very good. They give you step-by-step and how-tos on how to do this post-secondary advising work. But the Delaware Department of Education has step-by-step webinars on how to create and develop effective PSAP plans. And there are other supports that are available as well. If you just reach out and contact the department, they will happily connect you to all the supports. We want the practitioners to be well informed so that they can do this very important work. So at this time, we have another polling question. Amanda, would you please put that up for me? What training will you need to help support your PSAP development and implementation planning? I've gone over all of these 6 areas. Please let us know what area you might need additional support in order to implement. Give them the countdown, Amanda.
We'll give everyone about 15 more seconds.
Okay, it looks like you need more training on that vertical alignment transition practice. That's one of my favorite areas to talk about. And so we can certainly discuss why, the application and getting something together around that. The second one was disaggregating data. And I'll just give you a little tip: group, grade, and gender. When I do disaggregation data workshops, we talk the whole time about the 3 Gs: group, grade, and gender. Group is the ethnic group. So you can disaggregate by all the ethnicities that are present within your school building across your district. Grade is the grade level, is in 9, 10, 11, 12, 7, 8, and below. Gender, male and female. So if you just started with that, that would give you a good foundation and a very good window to begin with. In Chicago, as we evolved our work, we disaggregated by athletes, by sport participants, like what out of all the athletic teams, who had the highest FAFSA completion rates, who was engaged the most out of the athletes in AP. We disaggregated the data by elementary and middle school enrollment, like when the kids came from the elementary, middle schools, which students persisted more, which were failing a particular core subject area the most. So once you really get into data and start loving it the way that we do, you're gonna find it intriguing and fascinating. I guarantee it. Thanks so much. We'll turn it over for questions at this time.
So Joyce, could you talk a little bit about kind of the capacity or the ability to reach all of the students in this in the school? Can you talk about maybe like your caseloads and how you addressed it when you were in
Sure. Yeah. So a little background. I was a practicing school counselor for 30 plus years in one building. Of course, I started as a little girl before I went to central office to lead the work across a large urban district. The counselor caseload at that time was 360 to 1. So I know there are larger caseloads, but when we took on the work of adopting the Ask a National Counseling model, we were serious about fighting for reduced caseloads while also demonstrating that the benefits of reaching all students. So we designed a delivery plan. So you may not be able to do one-to-one contact with students when you have a large caseload, but we committed to having 4 contacts with every single student every 10 weeks. So that was across a variety of ways. If we could only have an assembly with all the kids every 10 weeks, that's what we did, to get in front of them to say, we are your counselor, this is what you should be thinking about, and here's how we can help you. We distribute those mail merge letters every 10 weeks so that the kids knew what they were failing, what their attendance was, what was going to hinder them from having post-secondary opportunities at the end of 12th grade. We did have an advisory program at my high school, and so that allowed us to push into the advisories and coordinate counseling activities in collaboration with the teachers. We also utilized pushing into the classrooms, and we did that when teachers were absent. We worked it out with our principals to take a lesson into the classroom so that the sub didn't have to deliver it. We would be in there talking to the students. Then we used the data to develop groups. Like what, when you looked at the data, you saw who you had to have a more up close and personal contact with. So the big groups, we touched everybody, made a commitment to giving out the correct messages to all students. It's really that tier 1, 2, and 3 intervention like MTSS. But then we went smaller around the data to see what groups we needed to make up. Like maybe it was a group for the kids who had multiple suspensions, or it was a group for the attendance kids, or it was a group for kids who had great test scores and were failing more than 3 classes. So we made up smaller groups. And then after we did those interventions, and we reached out to do one-to-one with those kids who needed intensive work. And as you know, with the large caseloads, you can't always do that. So that's when our collaborative partners came in and we would do referrals over. So hopefully that helps.
If you have other questions, do feel free to put them in the chat box, or you can unmute your phone.
I'll ask a question if nobody has one, but I wanted to give other people a chance to ask. This is Karen. Are there other questions?
I think you should go ahead, Karen, and while Karen's asking, please do feel free to drop them in the chat or raise your hand and we'll call on you next.
If counselors are kind of feeling like they're kind of out on a limb doing some of this work on their own, how did they get buy-in in the school building? Joyce, I think you can, that's probably one of your favorite topics.
It is. And what I tell school counselors is that they have to be leaders. They have to come out of their offices and engage with the teachers and other people that are working in your building. So much of our training, they teach us how to do the one-to-one model, but around the new ASCA counseling model, it's whole school change. And so one of the strategies that we use is that we attached ourselves to the department meetings. So we actually went to the department meetings, and when we showed up, the people were like, oh, you, we're like, right, we're here to help you and listen to how you're trying to make all the kids successful. So that did a lot to really build the relationships, because it really is about relationships. The other thing is that we got on the faculty agenda. The principal allowed us to update the faculty, to talk about the state of students at each grade level, share data with them. So every time there was a faculty meeting, we had a prominent role. And so the presence of leadership was elevated. You cannot get buy-in if the people don't believe and you don't inspire them to understand what you want for kids is what they want for kids. And so, and I will tell you a quick story. I'm not the kind of person who ever shies away from making all kids successful. So I told you the 9th grade and transition is my key area. And so when we first started the advisory program, there was no money for it. And so the principal said, well, we can't pay the people to do it, you know, contractually. And so I asked 12 of my friends would they join me. And they immediately said, yeah. And to this very day, we laugh about it because we just went out on a limb. They did it because I asked them if it was good for kids. I showed them that the freshmen were failing, and could we just try it for a semester? And we got such amazing results. Everybody started saying to me, why did you ask me, Joyce? Well, because I knew you weren't going to work for nothing. But I have just been really humbled by the fact that I've always kept the vision of student success. And so when you keep that at the center, it's not about the adults, it's really about helping all kids succeed. And that's how I got it. But I can tell you a lot of other strategies that I use as well, but that's the key one.
Okay, so we do have another question coming in. Let me go ahead and read it. So I'm going to read the whole comment. It says, there could be some folks with heads sort of spinning over this. A good spin can't hurt. But since many schools don't have wellness centers, and given the pervasive mental health challenges across so many grades and the nonstop meetings and emergencies as a result, how can school counselors find time to fit this in?
Well, I think that it starts with your administrator. And you and your administrator agreeing on what you can do. I get it. They see us as a catch-all people. Whatever comes across their desk, they move it to our desk. Everybody wants us to do everything. My favorite story is you'll have an office full of kids, the phone will be ringing, and somebody will come in and say, you got a minute? They just don't see that we're carrying this load. But I solved that problem because you will get burned out and you have too many priorities that people are putting at you. I always try to find and identify collaborative partners. And the mental health, social emotional piece is huge. You can imagine we're from Chicago, high violence. You read about us in the news. It's not a day that goes by that kids aren't getting shot. It's not a day that goes by that all kids know somebody who has died. They wear the t-shirts to school, rest in peace. It's really troubling. But I know as a school counselor, we cannot provide the wraparound family supports. We can do the initial, but then we have to move it on. So making our administrators understand that we cannot serve one-to-one student effectively, that we need a partner. So I can tell you that the hospitals in your area, the social services agencies in your area, look in Google them up. I got them all together to say, can you help us? This is what we're seeing. And before I left my school, we had a social service agency set up shop on site. And I was working with the local hospital to write a grant because these hospitals have money to address social and emotional issues, and they're looking for partners. And so I would say, get the 3 goals that you want to work on, show to your principal how, yes, you can work on social and emotional, you have that background, but while you're working on 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 cases, especially in this age of pandemic and all the violence that's happening in our society, that takes you out of the loop for all the other kids. Now, the state and the district is focusing on getting all ready. And so when they put you in the loop of helping 1 to 2 to 3 or 4, it takes you away from this whole student achievement model for everyone. So that's the talk that I've given all of my principals, and I've had the privilege of raising 7 principals in my 30 years at that one school. And once I showed them the data and what we the school counselors wanted to work on, they understood that we had to have priority goals, and they allowed us to work on them. And when I went to district office, one of the big things was I'm a big proponent of professional development. And one of the things that I'm most proud of is that they allowed me to take the counselors out of the school every single month for a half day of training. And we took them all out. And the principals, as you imagine, had a fit. But my superintendent and my director all said, no, this is protected time. English people have training, math people have training. If we want them to be engaged in this post-secondary advising work, they have to be trained. So you have to have a vision, have your script ready, and just go for it.
Any other questions?
Well, let's ask Kelly, let's ask everybody, put in the chat box if they're going to use data, make data their friend, and that they're going to go out and use this talk that we've had with them to really become data users. So give us a shout out in the chat box if you're going to take an action step.
All right, already lots of yeses coming in. I do want to, I don't know, I don't think I touched on this, but just want to follow up to Joyce's comment is that it should, this work, you know, and this is why we wanted to focus on the alignment to this data work to your post-secondary advising plan, is it shouldn't be new work or extra work. It should be supporting the work you're already doing. And that does come, you know, from your leadership structure to protect your time and what you've outlined and what the school has outlined and what the district has outlined as important. Because it's easy to get caught up in the fires that happen, the emergencies that happen every day. And that's not easy work. That's not easy work for anybody to protect time. But if you're, you know, if you're taking your plan seriously, then it should be reflective of the work you're doing in it, and it shouldn't be extra. All right, and somebody even wrote that data is their favorite four-letter word. So we're getting good feedback here.
Yes. Yes.
Great.
Great.
All right.
Well, we're going to do amazing things together. Yes. Mm-hmm.
So let's, oh, go ahead, Joyce, I'm sorry.
No, I was going to say, us and data, we're going to do amazing things together. We're going to capture all these strategies, and people are going to say, what's happening to them? And we would say they're using data to make change to help all the kids.
Perfect. So I think we just have two additional things to wrap up. So we have included here in the slides, and everyone will Karen will be sending out the slides, and we'll have a recording as well. Or actually, I think it's going to be posted on the Student Success website, but we'll have the slides for you guys to refer to, as well as the recording if you want to rewatch. So we've included in here our NPSI contact information. Should you have any additional questions, or if you want to go to our website and view some of our other webinars, where Joyce has been leading a series of webinars over the last month, and we'll continue into June around pressing issues that have been coming up related to the COVID-19 pandemic. So if you go to our website, you'll be able to see the list of webinars there. And then I'm going to turn it back over to Karen to wrap us up.
Well, I wanted to thank NPSI, Joyce and Kelly and Amanda for such great information. On the screen, you'll see a link to click where I'm asking school counselors and anyone who wants their hours to just click on this. Actually, I don't think you can click on it from the presentation, but it's—
I just put it in the chat box also.
Oh, it's in the chat box. It's also in PDMS. I put it in there where you registered. It's like a 4-question survey, just so I can have that to, you know, verify attendance and give you your hours and all of that. And just to wrap up, you know, such a big piece of our work is about communications. And just think that if more people, what your data is saying about your students and school results, imagine the buy-in that you could see. You know, telling that story and getting more people on board will help all of us in this work. And everybody's busy trying to do their own things, but having common goals will help drive success. So thank you all so much for your time. As always, if you need anything from me, please feel free to reach out. You all know how to find me. Student Success Plans, Nick Buono's on this call, and he's really the contact for your post-secondary advisement plans, but any of us can help you with any questions. And again, a big thank you to Dr. Joyce Brown, Kelly Sparks, and Amanda Mitchell for presenting this information. We're so excited to be working with you, and we really value the information that you shared with us today. I think that it's going to really be helpful for all of us. So thank you, everyone, and stay safe.
Yes. Yeah. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Bye.